So again, good morning and welcome everyone to the School of Information Sciences First Beyond Barriers Conversation on Equity in Information Conference. This year's topic is diverse youth literature, and it is an extension, sorry, morning voice. It is an extension of the conversation we started last fall during our Defending Access Librarian Perspectives on Banned Books panel event last semester. All right. Today's event will feature 2 student speakers, 2 guest authors, and a faculty panel that will delve into the research landscape of diverse youth literature. And as you can see on the schedule, we will have a brief break to give you guys some time to eat, breathe, do what you will. And now for a bit of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones muted while our speakers are presenting. We want to make sure we're giving them our time and our attention, and that we don't take away from the information they have to share with us today. In terms of questions, attendees can leave questions in the chat for speakers to answer at the end of each session. The DEI Programming Committee will be monitoring the chat for questions and any troubleshooting. And finally, please be kind and respectful to one another in the chat. We are all coming from different places, different backgrounds, different perspectives. And I want to make sure that today's event is a safe place for everyone to share, learn, and grow and take part in this event. All right. And with that, let's get started. Our first presentation is from CIS Library and Information Sciences student Jillian Beckwell.
Sorry to interrupt. She's still having a couple tech issues, so can we start with Lily?
We sure can. Thank you, Mike. Thanks. All right. So instead, we will start with CIS Library and Information Sciences student Lily Wiest. As a graduate student assistant at Wayne State Libraries, Lily had the opportunity to work on an urban youth collection. Today, she is sharing her experiences working on this project. And without further ado, here is Lily.
All right, can everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Let it load. Okay, hi everyone, good morning. My name is Lily, and so I'm going to talk about a project I did for an urban ethnic collection here at Wayne State. So in the spirit of transparency, and just because I think anytime we are talking about issues of diversity, it's important to recognize our own positionality. This is me. You can see a bunch of my identifiers over on the right, and on the left is where I currently work. I work part-time at the Ann Arbor District Library, and more relevant to this conversation, I work part-time at the Wayne State Libraries as a graduate student assistant. Some of that is public-facing on the desk and doing reference, but the majority of my work is doing specific projects for the library system, and this was one of those projects. So for this project, I focused on the Wills collection of urban ethnic materials for young people, which is a special collection here at Wayne State. It is named for Millicent A. Wills, and you can see her photo in her obituary there on the right. Ms. Mills attended Wayne State back in the 1940s, and then she was an active community member here in Detroit for the rest of her life. She taught in the Detroit public school system for 30 years and also authored 2 children's books. So when she passed away at the end of the 80s, she left a portion of her estate to the university, and the board decided to set up an endowed fund in her name to support a special collection under the juvenile literature collection here. And that fund has sort of a dual focus on preservation and access. So all of the books purchased for this collection are purchased in duplicate so that one can be stored here at Wayne State to be available to researchers and one can circulate in the community. Unfortunately, except for that stipulation and the title of the collection, We basically had no information about this collection. There was no formal collection development policy ever created for it. And because of the way our librarians here at Wayne State wear so many hats and are doing so many things, nobody had had time to actually do any selection for the collection in several years. So that was my goal, was to create a collection development policy for this collection and then to start selecting books. You can see some of what was already in the collection here. I know a bunch of you are library students or working in libraries already, and you already know a lot about creating collection development policies, so I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I wanted to share two things that were real takeaways from me from doing this project, and that I think are really important to keep in mind whenever you're building a multicultural collection, and that is the importance of specificity in your collection document and the importance of taking a strengths-based approach to these communities. So first, talking about specificity. Again, unfortunately, when this project started, we had a real lack of specificity. We only had the title of the collection to go on, basically. And so the first question for us, me and my supervisor, was to think about, what does urban ethnic actually mean? To me, that title kind of screams 1990. It's not what I would choose to name this collection today. I feel like I hear the term urban and ethnic often used as euphemisms from people who are afraid to say the word race or afraid to be more specific in their language. And what I didn't want to do is build a collection development policy that had some sort of very broad, vague statement like I see in a lot of library policies that said something like, this is a diverse collection aiming to meet the needs of all of our residents. Because to me, I think a collection development policy is supposed to be a guideline that can really guide you in the process of choosing these books. And something like that, that's kind of saying nothing, isn't going to guide you. So we wanted to be really specific about who this collection was for, who we wanted to be represented in it. And to do that, we considered Ms. Wills and her intent. You know, she was a Black woman in Detroit who spent 30 years teaching predominantly children of color in Detroit. And so we really wanted to focus it in our local context and highlight what makes Detroit and Wayne State unique. And so we looked at a lot of demographic data and put that data into the policy. So this collection does feature stories by and about all kinds of children of color in this country, but we decided to highlight and focus these three specific communities and include this demographic statistics in the policy itself. You can see some of the books that I selected under each of these categories at the bottom. For Arab Americans, we have the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country here in Southeast Michigan, which I didn't even know until I started doing the research work for this collection. And you know, we are one of the Blackest cities in America, so we wanted to highlight Black American experiences as well. And Michigan is home to 12 federally recognized Native tribes, whereas there are many states in this country that are home to 0. So we're something of a cultural hub, and we wanted to highlight that as well, specifically for the Anishinaabe people who are here in Southeast Michigan. So for all of you, again, you're probably not going to be charged with creating an urban ethnic collection in those words, but it's very likely that at some point you'll be asked to create a multicultural collection or select diverse books. And I just would encourage you to think about what those words actually mean. You know, go ahead and get out a piece of paper and brainstorm. Think about who you're trying to represent, what your actual goals are, and what makes your community unique. Because I think the more specific we can be in our goals and having it be backed by community analysis and data, that helps keep us accountable to make sure that we're not just choosing a bunch of books we like, right, but are actually trying to serve our communities. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of taking a strengths-based perspective. That kind of first step was the who, thinking about who are these books by and about. But of course, we also wanted to consider what the books are about, what issues and narratives are we hoping to be represented in this collection. Where the collection currently stood, we had a lot of nonfiction and a lot of historical fiction. We had a lot of books about slavery, for example, in this collection that had been published, you know, in the 90s. There was a real dearth of contemporary realistic fiction, not a lot of books that celebrated stories of young children of color in the city just living their lives. And what we did have was a lot of street lit. We have a lot of Walter D. Myers. And those books are great, But I realized when that was our background, and then my supervisor and I started to brainstorm a list of, what we wanted to be included as urban ethnic issues in this collection, we were brainstorming things like redlining or police brutality. And those are very important, and they are included in the collection. But when that was what my list looked like, and I knew that the books we already had were books about suffering and oppression and slavery, I started to get really uncomfortable with the idea that we were telling a single story. And I'm referencing Chimamanda Adichie's viral TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story, where she talks about the actual danger that happens when we look at marginalized communities and realize that we're telling the same narrative about them again and again, because it narrows our idea of who those people are and who they can be. And I also thought about this page from Ross Gay's book, The Book of Delights, which I read several years ago and loved. And I won't read the whole thing to you, but he says, "I have no illusions, by which I mean to tell you it is a fact, that one of the objectives of popular culture, popular media, is to make Blackness appear to be inextricable from suffering and suffering from Blackness, is to conflate Blackness and suffering, which is clever as hell if your goal is obscuring the efforts, the systems, historical and ongoing, to ruin Black people. Clever as hell if your goal is to make appear natural what is in fact by design." And so that's what I wanted to avoid. I felt like that was a real call to action for me, that we want to be honest about the oppressive systems that undergird our society here, but I never want to make those appear natural or inevitable, or to suggest that they represent the totality of somebody's experience. So this is the list that we ended up coming up with. I made this a year ago, so already I see things I would change or add. But these were, and it's not meant to be comprehensive, but these were some of the issues that we wanted to cover in the collection. You can see on the right under placemaking a bunch of the sort of positive ones that I added in about urban art and murals and green space in cities, mutual aid among neighbors, things like that. Under neighborhood identity, just the joy of living in multicultural cities. We just selected the book I'm From by Oge Mora, for example. But I also wanted to be sure that even when we were selecting books about more difficult topics like housing insecurity or redlining, et cetera, that we were choosing narratives that had a real focus on agency. So for example, Front Desk, which is a book I love by Kelly Yang, is the story of a young immigrant girl from East Asia who comes to America with her family, and they are living in a motel in really insecure situation, and their landlord is really exploitative. It's one of the first middle grade novels I've ever read that I felt like had a really critical analysis on economic exploitation. But the story centers on this young girl organizing her neighbors, and they essentially form a tenants' rights group and eventually take over the motel and become cooperative co-owners. And so to me, that's an example that really empowers the students who read it. Similarly, Take Back the Block by Crystal Giles is about a young Black boy who organizes his neighborhood to resist gentrification. Or the book Flying Kites, which is a graphic novel and is hard to read in many ways. It is about racism in our criminal justice system. It's about incarceration and the horrors of solitary confinement, but it focuses on the 2013 California prison hunger strike. And so its focus is on the way that these men who are incarcerated actively resist their own oppression by working together. And those are the kind of narratives that I want to imbue our children with. So again, just questions for reflection. What happens when all the stories we tell about kids of color are stories of suffering? How does that affect our audience? How does it change our psyches? And how can we build collections that honestly reflect oppressive realities without normalizing them? What would it look like to center a collection on empowerment and pride? So that was a bit about creating the selection policy. Very briefly, I'll just go over how I actually made selections. My process started by consulting award lists. You can see a list of all the awards I read through here on the side. I definitely went beyond just like the Newbery and Caldecott, and I recommend that for anyone trying to build a multicultural collection. I think it's really exciting how many like ethnically specific book awards there are, and a lot of them highlight books that do not get highlighted elsewhere in the book industry. I also, of course, read a bunch of reviews, starting with like Kirkus and School Library Journal, but those are all written predominantly by white women because that's who's predominant in the children's book industry. just like it's who's predominant in the library industry. So I also went and read a bunch of reviews on blogs like the Hijabi Librarians blog, for example, or Debbie Reese's great American Indians and Children's Literature blog. And I even went and read through Goodreads reviews, which I don't normally do, because of course they're usually like 1-star or 5-star. But I think it's really telling when you have more grassroots review opportunities like on Goodreads, how many people point out culturally specific things about these books that are just not mentioned and totally blown over in the more mainstream reviews. And so if you're building a multicultural collection, I just encourage you to take more time than you would normally take, especially in the review process. And then again, like I said, the great thing to me about having had this really specific selection policy is that I had a built-in evaluation criteria. So I created a draft, like you can see here, an example of part of my spreadsheet with all the metadata about these books and who's represented and the narrative issues and audience, et cetera. But once I had that first draft, I could take each book and just say, you know, okay, I'm excited about this book, but it's actually set in rural Missouri, so it's really not for this collection. Or, okay, I have had 37 books about Black Americans, and I said I was also going to focus on Arab Americans, and I've only chosen 3. So maybe I need to reallocate some of these funds to actually do what I said I was going to do. And I think that's the benefit of having a specific and accountable selection process. So at this point, I have selected 250 new books and counting. I just finished up another round of selection, and we are in the process of marketing to WSU departments. If you are with Wayne State, I encourage you to look at the catalog. A bunch of these books we ordered as ebooks so that you can read them. And I highlighted here 2 books. I think probably every librarian agrees, you know, selection is one of the best parts of the job. And it was a real joy to me to be able to buy books that I already loved, but it was an even bigger joy to find books through this process. And these are 2 that I had not heard of until I did this project and then absolutely fell in love with. So if you go through the catalog and you see other books that you think should be part of this collection that aren't, please feel free to send me a recommendation. I left my email there, but otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I will stop sharing the screen.
All right, thank you, Lily, for that wonderful first presentation to get us started. I'm looking and I don't see any questions in the chat, but now is the time if you have a question. Oh, we've got one. Here is our first one. How did you analyze your collection?
I'm assuming you mean the prior collection, and honestly, it's small enough that I just went up to the 4th floor and looked at it, looked at the books we had. I also reviewed, you know, from the online catalog, but no one had collected anything in so many years that it was almost like starting from scratch. I think we didn't have really any books from like the last 10 years. So my main goal was to just like fill in the gap, and I didn't have to worry a lot about duplication. But yeah, I just went and looked at it basically.
And I think that question allows for some additional conversation about diversity audits, because when we talk about diversity audits, there's also a quantitative aspect of, you know, how many of this is represented and what's the age. And like you said, you can do an eyeball test, but have you encountered some of the resources on diversity audit that you found useful? And can you speak a little bit more about that if you have?
Yeah, so I haven't done that with this collection. I haven't done it here. I did also work over the summer at a different library, and we were undertaking a diversity audit there, which is part of how I realized that there is not really like good software to do it, which seems like kind of a silly issue, but it is limiting. We were trying to run it through like a Google form, which was just difficult work. And we also found how difficult it can be to quantify some of these things. Like our students at that, it was a school library, were really interested in Own Voices books, but a lot of these authors were not necessarily self-identifying, you know, in every category online, nor should they have to, but it caused a lot of discussion that I think was really interesting on, we don't want to identify for people if they haven't self-identified. We don't necessarily want to be making guesses, but we want students to have accurate information. So I think it's really important. And I just actually think it's a much more difficult and thorough process than people think. They think it would be more like counting books. And so, yeah, I have not attempted it here yet, in part because of that, because I think it is requires a lot of time.
Do we have time for another question? I see something in the chat that I wanted to tie into this, but I just wanted to ask, follow up on, you said you involved students or at least had conversations with students about, the type of book. So are you familiar with efforts to involve students in diversity audits? And if so, can you talk more about that?
Well, I know it from your class, Dr. Kamasi. It's not something that we have done. Like I said, so this was a school library, but it was over the summer that I was there, so our students were not present. I know that they had some students involved in the process, during the school year, and I'm really excited about that possibility. There was an article that you shared, I think from School Library Journal in our class, that was actually talking about doing a diversity audit and involving students at the elementary level, that I thought was really exciting, because I think a lot of people wouldn't think that they were like old enough to do that, but the kids got really into it. And it started with something as simple as like, who do you see on the cover of this book? And then, writing down and creating those statistics. And I think what's exciting about that is even if you don't like finish it and you don't have the product, you have taught kids how to think about it, which is part of the whole point.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I see, Lily, there are 2 more questions in the chat for you.
I'm happy to put them there so we can move on.
Okay, I was gonna say we're falling a little bit behind, so we have to move on. If you want to, you can answer the 2 remaining questions that are in the chat. And thank you everyone for these questions and for the conversation happening in the chat. It's great. And thank you again, Lily. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm really glad to have that knowledge about our collection. And I'll have to dig into it a little bit more as an employee, since it's just right down the hallway. All right, next is the first of our 2 guest author speakers, Melissa Mimi Olson. Melissa Olson is an award-winning writer recognized as a Highlights Author of the Month. Olson's debut novel, Middle School is No Place for Magic, published by Fifth Avenue Press, was listed as an Amazon Hot New Release, #1 in the teen and young adult fiction category, being a teen. A former journalist and communications specialist, Mimi has been writing, presenting, and developing workshops for over 25 years. Her current workshop is a creative writing workshop for middle schoolers titled Finding Your Spark, that is available both in person and virtually. Publications include pieces in Metro Parent, Jack and Jill, High Five Magazine, Pulse, and Highlights. Mimi lives in Ann Arbor with her husband, daughter, and 2 very spoiled cats. Here to remark on her experiences writing an LGBTQ-focused young adult book and more, here is Melissa Mimi Olson.
Thank you so much, Amber. It's such an honor to be able to speak on this topic. It's definitely a passion of mine, and I am thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen so that I can tell you a little bit about myself and my journey as a writer, and how I came to write a book that is considered diverse for middle schoolers. So just a little bit about me. I know you touched on this. I am married. I have a daughter. We're empty nesters now. She studies animation in Chicago. I do have 2 very spoiled cats. I went to Michigan, and I work at Michigan Medicine in the Office of Patient Experience, and I manage the recruitment, training, and coordination of our healthcare peer mentors and advisors. And that's a job I really love. They're healthcare advocates who use their stories to help improve the patient experience for everyone that comes to Michigan Medicine. And so that's a really neat way to use story to influence culture. And I also have been involved as a social activist, particularly information activism for the last 8 years. It really started, my information activism started with the birther movement, which was really disturbing to me, that Barack Obama would be questioned about the authenticity of his status as an American. And so that's when I started doing information activism and trying to, as much as I could, fight the disinformation and bigotry that I see happening online. So that's a big part of my life, and all those passions kind of tie in together. So I did just have my debut novel published. I was so fortunate to work with Fifth Avenue Press, and that is what I call an altruistic press. It's very unique. It was started by librarians in the Ann Arbor District Library who wanted to see more voices of authors and writers in our own community put forth. So it was really a pleasure to work with the Fifth Avenue Press editors and employees. So this novel was born, the idea for the novel was born after I took my daughter to a magic show in Ypsilanti. And the magician had his son, who was about my daughter's age, about 10, was his magician's assistant. And I could not get how cool that was, that idea, out of my head. So, but I just putting myself into the mind of the 10-year-old, I thought, what is that going to be like to have a dad who's a magician and to be performing and to be out there like that when you get into middle school? Because I know my experience in middle school, I was embarrassed of everything. My mom used to wear scarves all the time, and I would just beg her, please don't wear your scarf. Why that bothered me, I do not know, but it did. So that's what the novel centers on. And the main character, whose name is Jay, has a multiracial friend group, and they come from multiple economic statuses. They're characters that represent different sexual orientations. This book was created for grades 6 through 8th. And it was based really on raising a daughter in Ann Arbor in a diverse school system, like the public school system in Ann Arbor, we found to be very diverse. And my daughter is bisexual. She's open and allows me to speak on that, which I applaud her bravery with that. And she really served as the my sensitivity reader. She also read the book over for cringe because, moms are cringy, so I can't guarantee there's no cringiness in the book, but I was really fortunate that she was able to guide me in those chapters where one of the characters comes out to his friends as being gay, and what that is like today, which, watching her friend group grow up in Ann Arbor, it really is sort of a non-issue in a lot of ways. It's just part of who they are. And it doesn't really have the impact that it did when I was growing up. And I'll go into a little bit about, what it was like when I was growing up versus what it's like now and what I see now with Gen Z. The other thing I was able to incorporate into the novel is just, a reflection of a city that I love, and being able to walk through the streets of Ann Arbor and hearing all these different languages and seeing different types of families as you walk along, and the many things that I enjoyed about raising a child here. And we moved to Ann Arbor because I wanted my daughter to be able to be her authentic self. And I feel like the kids who are raised in diverse areas are they're more free to do that. And I wanted her to just be able to be whoever she decided to be, whoever she was. And so that was part of the reason we moved to Ann Arbor. So I'll move on from there. I just want to touch on the awesomeness of Gen Z. I know Gen Zers often get pegged and labeled as things that I feel like are unfair, because what I found with my exposure to my daughter and her friends and my nieces and nephews and almost everyone that I've met who's Gen Z is that they're so authentic and they're open-minded and they're brave in being themselves and being so vocal about this is who I am. And I've learned a lot from that younger generation about being more open-minded. And the other thing that I found interesting in the research, the little bit of research that I did on Gen Z, is that they crave connection. And I think that's really interesting. And also that a majority want to change the world in a positive way. And that is what I definitely want focused on is that connection that Jay, my main character, has with his friend group, with his community, and with his family. So I started thinking more and more about the connection between literature and empathy right around the 2016 election. And I think that was because I was seeing things being said about certain parts of our community. And I was feeling the impact of that. I can't imagine watching a candidate bully and make fun of somebody who's disabled and then be disabled myself and not feel that. Or like, for instance, myself having experienced sexual assault, what does that feel like to hear that even though you have a candidate, and I don't want to make this too political, even though you have a candidate who is essentially bragging about sexually assaulting women, you're still going to have a big significant portion of your community members supporting that person. What does that feel like to someone like me and to others who have experienced sexual assault? So that's when I started kind of making this connection between, how can we build empathy? Because empathy is something that you can grow within yourself. It's a skill that you can learn. And what does literature have to do with growing empathy? And I found that it has a lot to do with growing empathy. And it's a great way to grow empathy in our society is by experiencing what characters feel, agonizing over their decisions, mourning their losses, rejoicing in their achievements. That really grows our empathetic abilities as we walk through those experiences with the characters we read about. One of my heroes is empathy expert Brene Brown, and she says, empathy fuels connection, which we all crave, right? In that empathy is connecting with the emotion in a person. And so you don't necessarily have to have gone through the very same experiences as a character in a novel to be empathetic with them. It's more about feeling what they're feeling. So I really appreciate authors who use emotive techniques in their writing, that they do bring out those feelings. And I think that's one of the great powers of sharing story. So there are a lot of different influences when you're thinking about what influences a writer, what influences their voice, or the word choices. And there are a lot of different influences on literary voice. And by that, I mean literary voice is used to express the author's emotion, attitude, tone, and point of view. And I think all these different things, a person's spiritual conviction, the things that they've read, what they've experienced, your cultural background, your family life, trauma you've gone through, your societal outlook, all these different things really influence an author's comfort level in writing diverse characters into their work. If my daughter had not grown up in Ann Arbor with a group of friends that were very, very diverse in many ways, would I have been comfortable to write a character who was gay? And I really can't answer that, because I am comfortable writing that based on my experience. But I think it's interesting to think about that. I really love this fairly new concept of sensitivity readers, and the fact that our younger writers and really writers in general are looking at are basically acknowledging that, I'm not the expert in this. Who can I turn to? Who can I call on and say, hey, can you take a look at this chapter? Because I'm Christian, but I'm writing about a character who's Hindu, and I want to make sure this feels authentic, that it's not just something I'm doing as a token to say I have a character in my book who's Hindu. I want it to actually be meaningful. So that is something to think about too. So for me, I'm going to focus on two different things that influence my literary voice with the books that I write. And so the main one is just growing up in how I did. This is my family. So I'm the youngest of 5 by far. I have sisters and brothers who were 18, 17, 10, and 12 when I was born. So I was the oops baby. But I certainly benefited from parents who were older and wiser, I feel. I grew up in Columbiaville, so it was a town of 800 people. So in a lot of ways, my world was really small. But I still had a lot of rich experiences, and part of that was because I was shy on the shyer side, and I was very much a bookworm. So books were really important. I just want to talk a little bit about my dad primarily, in that, even though I grew up in a small town, my parents were, you would consider them now very progressive in their thinking. I don't think that they would have known to even call themselves progressive, but what they saw themselves as were Christians, and as Christians, they believed in loving everyone, and they believed in treating everyone with respect and dignity, and being open-minded, and understanding that you don't know everything, that some things are unknowable, and that your experience is just your experience. So I really, growing up, by the time I was born, my parents, 2 of their best friends were a couple, and they were one of the only Black couples in the little teeny town that I grew up in. They also befriended civil rights leaders in our area, and my dad ended up playing a small part in desegregating the salary corps of General Motors. And a lot of that happened before I was born. But by the time I was born, my parents' attitudes about racism was really solidified. And I would say they were, at that point, actively anti-racist. And that's the home I grew up in. So, with my grandma and Grandma Durden, they found out that they watched my parents lose all 4 of their parents in their 30s. All 4 of my grandparents passed away tragically by the time I was born. So Grandma and Grandma Durden offered to be my honorary grandparents, and that's who I know them as. I didn't look at them and see skin color. I saw their beauty that really just shone from within them. And they were a constant source of love and stability for me growing up, and their whole family really was part of my family. But as a kid, when I did witness racism, or I heard somebody say something racist, it was really shocking to me, because that wasn't the home that I grew up in, and my grandparents, the people I loved, were Black. And I really struggled to understand how, anyone could hate somebody for something like the color of their skin or their faith or whatever reason people have to hate. And my dad, I remember him saying many, many times, he would say, when I grew up, he grew up by Alpena, The English look down on the Scots, and the Scots look down on the Irish, and the Irish look down on the Swedes, and the Swedes look down on the Norwegians, which, by the way, his grandparents immigrated from Norway. And, and they look down on the Native Americans, and on and on and on. And then he'd look at me and say, does that make any sense to you? And so, of course, I would say no, it doesn't make sense. And that's kind of the attitude that I bring to my books. So I grew up reading a lot. Like I said, this is my little library growing up. And what I loved about the stories that I read was that I could completely lose myself in a different world. I could be running through a town, through a rainstorm, or, rocking a baby with a ghost, or, a lot of my stories actually, because I was raised in a Christian home, came from the Bible. So that was a big part of my life. And then as I went into middle school, I just fell in love with Judy Blume. And part of what I loved about her was that she was very convicted about writing realistic fiction. And I was Margaret. I really felt such a connection to her because I had very much had a spiritual life even as a young kid. And I feel like, and I think, I write spirituality into most of my characters because that we are all in a certain level spiritual beings, right? And I loved that she did that and that she made that point. And then I want to also quote a piece by Scholastic Magazine about teachers. And it said, as teachers, we may find ourselves looking at books to help teach social issues, to use fiction to help demystify what seems like an increasingly confusing and confused world. While fiction can shock us and thrill us, upset us, there remains that safe blanket of distance, however thin, that simultaneously insulates us from the grittiness of reality while allowing us to tiptoe into more perplexing, difficult, and challenging topics. It's well documented that reading is linked to the development of empathy in children and young people. And so I would just encourage you to continue looking for those books that children and young adults today can relate to. And that means diverse books, because we are increasingly a diverse society, beautifully so. As I aged and became an adult, I really started delving into books from people of other races, cultures, just to learn more about the world that I didn't know. And like, for instance, with Middlesex, reading it really opened my eyes to non-binary concepts. So that book and many others has had an impact on my own writing about people in the LGBTQ community, about the fluidity of sexuality, and about what that means for our society. And then the main thing that struck me, though, about reading Middlesex was that being intersex was only part of the main character's identity and personality. It was just a part of who they were. It wasn't the whole story, as none of us are. And then with Beloved, I want to just read this quote from Toni Morrison, that there is no suitable memorial or plaque or wreath or wall or park or skyscraper lobby honoring the memory of the human beings forced into slavery and brought to the United States. There's no small bench by the road, she continued, and because such a place doesn't exist that I know of, the book had to. So I read a lot of Black literature because I think I wanted to try to understand a little bit about what my grandma and Grandma Durden went through. I knew that they had moved to Michigan from Georgia. All I have is my imagination to try to understand what their journey was like. I didn't have the prescience to really ask them a ton of questions, and I lost them when I was in college. So I wish I could go back and ask them so many questions, but what I could do is read about the Black experience in America through these amazing authors. And then in The World According to Garp, I fell in love with the character Roberta Muldoon. And that was my first experience with a person who was trans. And I think it's interesting that critics note how John Irving depicted Roberta with zero judgment. And I'll bring Brene Brown back into it because she notes that judgment kills connection. And so as an author, I think writers, we need to approach how we characterize the people we're writing about in our books, how we develop those characters with non-judgment, because that's going to kill the connection that your readers have with those characters. And I also really appreciate what John Irving said about the turmoil we're going through today and some of the book bans. He said, look at the countless Republican state legislations lately that have been of an anti-LGBTQ community nature, the banning of books on the LGBTQ community subject. So kids in high school who are coming out as gay or lesbian or trans are denied access to knowing they're not alone. They are essentially made to feel more isolated and alone, especially at that age when they already might feel alone. That's willfully cruel. At the time when I finished The World According to Garp, I was actually naive enough to think that all the sexual hatred was going to be over before the book was even published, and that the book would be dated. And growing up, I can say I definitely related to that, but more about race. I thought my entire life up until a certain point in recent history that we were moving toward the post-racial world that I've always dreamt of, the post-really bigotry world, where everyone can be their authentic self. And so I too have felt naive about that feeling that I had. And I realized even more so how blessed I was to grow up with the post-racial view that my parents instilled in me. And that's why I fight for that as an information activist and as an author. So, and then I just want to say a little bit about probably my favorite author is John Steinbeck. And what I love the most about him is his empathy. He had such a deep empathy for others that he could literally put himself in to the minds and the hearts and souls of people who at the time, especially with Grapes of Wrath, they did not have a voice. And it was because of that human connection that he had and the love of humans that he had, that he could shine a light on the happenings of the world in real time. And I think that takes a special kind of author, that they can shine that light in their current situation, to be able to even see that, what's going on, and then to be able to describe it in fiction, I think makes him one of our greatest writers, of course, of all time. This is when we're talking about diversity of characters in fiction, I think what we're really talking about is character development in a lot of ways. And this is a slide from the middle school short story workshop that I've been giving at various schools. And so I asked the students that are in the workshop to think about what are the 5 traits. Just write down 5 traits for each character. One of them is what they look like, but there's so many other traits. And one thing that I read, saw a video of this gentleman, Dr. Russell Barkley, who's a professor of psychiatry and neurology. He came out with this video where he describes that through all this research in the last 20 years, scientists have discovered that each one of us is made up of 400 individual traits. Think of all the possibilities. Think of how complex, how unique each one of us is, unique as butterflies. And so I think that's really beautiful as a writer, to recognize all the varieties of characters that you can come up with, and to really focus on the fact that we are more than one thing. With working in patient advocacy, one of the main lessons we like to pass on to new residents or new nurses is that our patients are not their diagnoses. They are so much more than that. And we want to look at people as whole people. Same with the characters. We want to look at our characters and give them the depth that they deserve and the respect that they deserve, and treat them each as individuals and unique in and of themselves. So that's how I approach character design and development. And then some things I think to also think about when you're either looking for a book for your collection, your library collection, or to read, or when you're starting out as a writer, is take some time to think about what biases you've been brought up with, what implicit bias you might have, and then address that and work through that so that doesn't leak into your stories. And then also, as writers, one of the great things we get to do is explore the world, right? So go out and try new foods, talk to people, experience new cultures, go to Heritage Night if your elementary school like ours had a Heritage Night, and ask questions and be curious, and try to know as much about the cultures, particularly if you're writing about a culture other than your own, or sexuality other than your own, or race other than your own. Seek help, ask a lot of questions, and make sure you're competent about that culture. And then avoid tokenism and focus on individuality and the connectedness. Because what I learned from reading all those books from all those diverse authors is what we have in common, which is those things that are eternal, like love and friendship and trust and loyalty. And those things are threaded through all those books. And so focus on the connectedness that you find around you. I love this quote, and I use this quote a lot in my work with Michigan Medicine. But I want to close my talk with a quote from author and civil rights activist James Baldwin. And I love that he admitted that he once hated Shakespeare, because to be honest with you, I kind of felt the same way for a little bit, until he started seeing Shakespeare's work as, and now I'm quoting, a vehicle for love and mutual understanding in a society woven of otherness, a purpose all the more vital and vitalizing in our troubled and troubling times. The greatest poet in English language found his poetry where poetry is found, in the lives of the people. He could have done this only through love. And his responsibility, which is also his joy and his strength in his life, is to defeat all labels and complicate all battles by insisting on the human riddle, to bear witness, as long as breath is in him, to that mighty, unnameable, transfiguring force which lives in the soul of man, and to aspire to do his work so well that when the breath has left him, the people, all people who search in the rubble for a sign or a witness, will be able to find him there. So thank you so much again for having me, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right, thank you, Melissa, for a wonderful and an enlightening conversation. You brought up a lot of topics that I think we could all take some time to think about and incorporate into our work. I'm looking at the chat. You're getting some thank yous, but I don't see any questions. Now is the time. If you have any questions for Melissa, now is your time. And of course, if you find that you have questions later for our speakers, you can put them in the chat and they will get back to you when they are able. Oh, it looks like we've got one. This one is from Joshua. He says, how has the reception to your work helped you think about what and how you might write next?
That's a great question. I have not started my next novel. I have a novel I wrote previously that I'm hoping to finish first, but I am planning a sequel to this novel, and it's going to be focused around a young woman this time, going into middle school or going into high school. And she is going to be an activist, so that's going to be a big part of the story. And so I'm sort of ruminating on that in my mind. As far as the reception of the book, it's been really, really warms my heart to even be invited to this and to, be able to talk about these topics. And the reception so far has been really good. I have to admit, I didn't worry about the book being banned or disparaged because of the diversity in the book, because quite frankly, that wouldn't bother me anyway. That's fine if that's what people want to do. They don't have to read it. And I knew writing it that this book would not be for everyone. So, and I also I follow Judy Blume's lead in saying this is realistic fiction. So, and that's really my answer to that. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you for that.
All right, anyone else? Any more questions? All right, well, thank you again, Melissa. That was a wonderful talk. We appreciated it. I certainly did. All right, we will now shift gears over to our final student speaker. This is SIS Library and Information Sciences student Jillian Beckwell. Her research project focused on the importance of LGBTQ representation in children and young adult literature through examining the Heartstopper graphic novels. And so without further ado, Jillian may take it away.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen really quick. I would first like to say thank you for your flexibility. I had a bit of tech issues. I've lived in this house for 4 years and have never experienced a power outage, but today is definitely the day for that. So thank you, Lily, for being able to switch so quickly. I really appreciate it. I would also like to say thank you so much for having me today. It has been such a wonderful experience creating this presentation, learning from it, and being able to share and participate in this conference. So thank you so much. My name is Jillian Beckwell, and I am an MLIS student at Wayne State University. One of the reasons I was inspired to join this program and pursue a career in library science was the fact that libraries were a safe space growing up for me. I went to the library pretty much weekly, if not multiple times a week, and I always felt safe checking out books that interested me and being able to grow up into a lifelong learner and lover of reading. Recently, there have been many instances of individuals trying to restrict the ways in which libraries can be a safe space, an example of which I will be discussing today. Today, I will be talking about a graphic novel series that has brought many readers comfort and has brought hatred out in others. Heartstopper Volume 1 and 2 by Alice Osman were challenged at a Michigan library a few years ago. With the recent growth in the LGBTQ+ community, we are unfortunately seeing an equally growing open manifestation of homophobia and transphobia. One way this appears is in book challenges and book bannings at public libraries. BetScreen acknowledges that libraries are meant to serve and reflect all members of the community. Knox also notes that they are meant to provide information and resources to their patrons without any restrictions in order to protect the rights of the community to read, speak, and publish within the library space. Through book challenges and book bannings, some community members are endangering the materials that other citizens benefit from and even rely on. For this presentation, it is important to note the difference between a book challenge and a book banning. Based on definitions from the American Library Association, book challenges attempt to remove or restrict materials, while book bannings are the actual removal of said materials. Some parents who view bannings as a means to protect their children from corruption and non-normative sexual identities also want to protect the present American society and the one that their children will create and live in. Knox found that parents who start the book banning process are often very concerned with the state of society and sense that society is on the decline and drifting morally. This idea often connects to religion in a conservative, extreme, and manipulated form. Alapradini and Sprague note that since 2000, the religious right and conservative groups have become increasingly vocal and have challenged books for recurrent reasons, while arguing that the US culture has become too free. Many conservative religious groups and followers consider the growing LGBTQ+ community as a sign that American culture has lost its morality. Public libraries are often targeted because these institutions are the face of the community, the wider society, and should contain only carefully selected knowledge that reflects what challengers believe are the community's values. On top of this desire to protect society, parents who want to shield their children from inappropriate content also believe that their child shouldn't be the only one following their standards and try to impose their restrictions on all children. This explains why parents, patrons, and rights advocates want to ban books in public spaces like libraries, as not only will their children be protected from supposedly unsuitable books, but everyone in their community and society as a whole. The Patmos Library, located in Jamestown Township, only 20 minutes away from Grand Rapids, larger city in Michigan, experienced an onslaught of book challenges. This is the result of a successful campaign from a group known as the Jamestown Conservatives, which was meant to raise awareness of the pushed agenda of explicit content that is aimed towards children at libraries. This group on their Facebook page makes aware that they stand to keep their children safe and protect their purity, as well as to keep the nuclear family intact as God designed. The explicit content in question, of course, is the presence of queer content. Those among this group and others who think like them believe that youth are asexual and innocent beings that need to be protected from anything involving sexual orientation and gender identity. What these people fail to recognize is that these materials are tools that can be used by youth to learn more about identity, acceptance, and just how to be a decent human being. Heartstopper Volumes 1 and 2 are among the 6 books challenged at the Patmos Library. So just to clarify, a patron requested that they be removed from the shelves, but no actual restrictions took place. These 2 graphic novels follow the story of British teens Nick and Charlie as their friendship blooms into something more when Nick quickly realizes that his feelings for Charlie are romantic. Because Nick has always identified as straight, the 2 figure out how to act on these feelings for each other, while Nick comes to understand his bisexuality. Alongside Nick and Charlie are their friends of diverse identities and orientations, all of whom together navigate friendship, high school, and like any other coming-of-age story, growing up. As I have previously mentioned, Heartstopper is among the group of books, specifically graphic novels, which have been targeted for explicit and morally wrong content. I feel the need to mention that I have read all 6 challenge materials in question, and only one of them had any sexual scene. The other 5 were targeted because of their LGBTQ+ content. The most explicit that Heartstopper gets is hand-holding, hugging, and at the very most, kissing. Taylor St. Pierre, in her review of the novel, calls it in simple terms: adorable, innocent, and pure. This begs the question, how can these books be labeled as explicit when there is nothing actually explicit in them? Is it because they are in picture form? Perhaps seeing actual depictions of hand-holding and kissing is just too much and too inappropriate for their children. However, there are many other graphic novels among the young adult and juvenile sections at the Patmos Library that contain romance and sexuality that haven't been challenged, let alone banned. For example, Friends Forever by Shannon Hale depicts kissing among heterosexual couples, talks of taking things further with another person, and even a 13-year-old being groped by an older man. Clearly, this book depicts the same amount of romance among young couples and even more sexual innuendos and aggression than Heartstopper. Despite this, there has been no outcry about this book or desire to have its access restricted or be removed from the shelves of the library. It is clear that people like the Jamestown Conservatives do not necessarily want to protect their children from discussing romantic or sexual relationships. Instead, it is the queer relationships and identities within these books that they want to ban. With these bans come a ban in resources, however. Rudine Sims Bishop notes that books are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors in which readers can see a reflection of themselves, see into a different world, and even walk through an imagination to become a part of that world. Heartstopper Volume 1 and 2 can act as windows, as readers can see into a lifestyle that they may never experience. Instead of teaching youth to become queer, transgender, or even just sexual beings as the Jamestown conservatives seem to think, these books encourage young readers to become kind human beings and allies to those who are different from them. Readers can visibly see the hurt and weight that negative comments place on Charlie as he is subjected to verbal abuse from classmates. In one depiction of these comments, Charlie appears shrunken and alone as he faces a large wall of insults blocking his path. From this depiction and many others throughout the story, readers can come to understand that their LGBTQ+ classmates and those in the community around the world go through struggles that they will never even have to face, and that they should treat them respectfully and with empathy. Another aspect of the story that evokes empathy and allyship is when characters stand up for Charlie. At one moment, Nick becomes so fed up with the comments that he punches Charlie's bully and his no longer friend in the face. While this is definitely not the safest way to stand up for someone, which Osmond makes sure is depicted right after as Nick's mother scolds him immediately, readers will be able to see Nick's journey as he comes to the conclusion that bullying is not something that should be tolerated. Osmond makes sure to depict a safer way to stand up for a classmate when Nick pushes Charlie's ex-boyfriend away when he is forcing Charlie to kiss him. While Ben had seen Charlie as a body to experiment with, Nick had seen Charlie as a person and just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Nobody was injured, and Nick even made sure to check in with Charlie afterwards to see if he was doing all right mentally. Through both of these interactions, readers can see that they should stand up for their peers no matter their orientation or identity. Texts like Heartstopper can open the eyes of readers to wrongdoing and prevent harmful actions from happening. It is through this idea that books like the first two Heartstopper volumes are a resource, as they can teach young readers both how to respectfully treat those of the LGBTQ+ community and how to encourage others to do the same. The Heartstopper volumes can also act as mirrors. Nick, Charlie, and their friend group make up a variety of queer and racial and ethnic diversity in which anyone can see themselves represented. These characters make up lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, and demisexual identities, and have ethnic and racial backgrounds such as Chinese, Spanish, Black, White, and Middle Eastern. Honestly, any reader will be able to pick up this book and find a character that looks like them or identifies like they do. It is incredibly beneficial for children and teenagers to have diversity of this sort present within their literature. The feelings of confusion that occur when one is questioning their gender or sexual identity often coincide with feelings of self-doubt and loneliness. To be able to see a character that looks like you struggle and come out successful is just incredibly reassuring. Take the character Charlie, for example. A person can see Charlie be forcibly outed to his school and face verbal abuse and prejudice, but also be protected by classmates and eventually return to his popular status among his peers. They can also read about his being a regular teen, joining a sports team, playing the drums in his school band, and having a crush, all while being open with his sexual identity. Readers can also read the story of Elle and her experience with transitioning. They can see Elle being called by her chosen name, Charlie stopping Nick before he can call her by her dead name when he wasn't aware of her transition, and even finding a place to be herself as she moved to the all-girls school after coming out. These few panels show how Elle's identity is respected among her friends and the adults around her. With these two characters and their friends, one can not only see themselves in these characters, but see them overcome challenges, develop friendships and romantic relationships, go to school, and overall be proud of themselves and their identities. This in turn can hopefully show youth who are struggling with their identity that it is normal to feel how they do and to be who they are. Young readers can picture themselves, their family, and their friends in positive situations like these characters and feel a little less alone amongst themselves. While people like the Jamestown conservatives believe they are protecting their community, they are actually taking away the resources that young readers need. In a world where homophobia and transphobia are incredibly prevalent and loud, these voices can often paint a negative image for the young readers who may be listening. Books like Heartstopper work to counteract these harmful words as they prove that there are people in the world who are welcoming and accepting. By housing these books within their catalogs, libraries are showing youth that there is a space for them to feel happy with who they are and how they identify, which is incredibly essential. You young readers deserve to have these resources in their libraries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jillian, for your presentation. I definitely need to pick up the Heartstopper graphic novels because they sound fascinating. But thank you. I'm going to turn to the chat to see if there are any questions. Now is the time. If you have a question for for Jillian and her presentation and her research, now is the time. All right. It looks like no questions have come up right now. It looks like comments are coming in for you. But if you do find that you have questions for Jillian, you can put them in the chat and she will be able to respond to them as they come up. Thank you so much again. And now we will switch gears and we will move to our second and final guest author speaker, and that is Desiree Cooper. A 2015 Kresge Artist Fellow, Desiree Cooper is a former attorney, Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist, and community activist. She is an evocative speaker on the themes of racial and gender equality, reproductive freedom, family-positive public policy, and the welfare of women and girls. Cooper's latest publication is a children's book, Nothing Special, published by the Wayne State University Press. The book is based upon the friendship between her father and grandson. It has earned a starred review from Booklist, inclusion in the New York Public Library's list of the top 10 children's books of 2022, and winner of the 2023 Paterson Prize for Books for Young People. She was a founding board member of Cave Canem, a national residency for Black poets, and has received residencies at Kimbilio and Ragdale. Having forged a 30-year career in Detroit, she now lives in the Virginia Beach area where she cares for her aging mother and raises her 3 grandchildren. Here to discuss Nothing Special, a love letter to Black family connections, and more, without further ado, Desiree Cooper.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks everyone who's here today. I got a chance to listen to some of the prior presentations, and I'm overwhelmed and so feeling so informed, and also feeling grateful that this kind of conversation is happening around curating information for young minds of all kinds. So I want to talk a little bit about my book, Nothing Special, and give you some context. I am the 64-year-old grandmother, and you can't call me grand anything. I don't like that word. They have to call me Jaja. So I have gone through my own children's books as a child, which started me in the love of writing and reading, my children, and then again for grandchildren. And one thing that I have come to notice is that as the publishing world has opened up for more diverse stories, and I'm going to specifically look at stories about African-American history and culture, the books right out of the gate have been books that help correct, fill in, add context to stories of the African-American experience in terms of historical impact. So a lot of them are on Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, people whose stories we may know a little bit about, but we want to round out those stories and add more context. It has moved with my kids' generations. These are 30-somethings. when they were little, the books were moving a little bit more into forgotten stories. And that is the history of people you never ever heard of, but they actually invented the stoplight. They actually did the first blood transfusion, or, you know, think that the people who were really the groundbreakers who never got credit. And so a lot of the children's books were focused that way. Now I'm seeing a different kind of children's book that is focused for particularly African American children. And this goes along with something that I have recently wrapped my arms around in Black History Month. I always say that we have to remember that the history of enslavement and slavery, as the business of that, is white history. The history of how it was survived and transcended is Black history. And so this is what I'm seeing now, in not just around Black History Month, but in all kinds of literature focused toward Black children, is to legitimizing the culture that formed around, it's like a cocoon that formed around the wound of enslavement, that provided a ladder for triumph. Okay, so out of the trauma, there is Black joy and Black triumph. And so we have focused on the trauma for years, as we should and need to continue to do. Now we are seeing a layer, an overlay of just straight up Black joy. What is it like to just be a Black kid interacting in the world? Okay, and so I want to applaud that, and I want to take your mind to that a little bit, because I think our reflexes, we need to expand our African American literature. And so we're going to get Rosa Parks, and we're going to get Martin Luther King, and we're going to get if you think about it as a child, I don't know how many of you would say your favorite book as a child was nonfiction, number one, or was a story of a famous person. It was probably more about a pig or a spider, you know, or a butterfly, or kids that are wandering in a mystical world. And that's where we need to take the Black stories as well. So how do I get to nothing special? Amber, I am going to try my very best to share my screen. Let's see how I do here. All right, I've got that. And now, are you guys seeing a screen of a presentation now? Let's get it to start from beginning. There we go. Go ahead, Des. Okay, so so I talked this about taking the Black trauma, we're not going to forget about it, and translating the hard stories age appropriately for youth. So I hope you're going to be able to hear this. So, Alley Cat, did you know that we are African Americans?
We're Virginia people. We don't live in that state.
What? So we're not African Americans?
We are. We live far away from African America.
Okay, well, you're making a good point. So what are we?
We're folks.
Ah, gotcha. Thank you. So Alley Cat, did you? So this is what happens when we are not age appropriate with talking about race, especially now when we are, you know, we are generations out of the active civil rights movement. Trust me, I'm not putting any of this in our rearview mirror. I understand Black Lives Matter just happened. Everything is just happening. But we are out of the everyday breaking of barriers, and now we are more into shifting culture in terms of state of mind and politics, et cetera. So talking to children about the direct race is a foreign language. That's not the world that they're living immediately they're growing into that world as we teach them how to be racist, as we teach them what the social boundaries are, the racial boundaries are. And so sometimes you can make an accident by teaching them about race through a child's book because it's not age appropriate, okay? That they don't really understand what's happening. And so you always want to address race, but you do it in age appropriate ways. I talk to any of you that know children's literature know Marilyn Nelson, who is a very famous and well-decorated children's book author. She's done these books, and look, we have a Wreath for Emmett Till, not shying away at all from the actual horrors of racism in America. But one thing she said to me is, if you really want to change minds, you need to be writing for children. And that was the genesis of my book, Nothing Special. I wanted to write immediately about the relationship between my dad and my grandson. So these are actually great grand people in this picture. They became fast buddies. My dad was not my buddy when I was growing up. Air Force sergeant, you know, he's stoic, rules are rules, discipline. All of a sudden, I see this man rolling on the floor with this little kid, sharing snacks, sneaking him cookies, all this kinds of things. So I'm thinking, wow, I really want to write about that. But I found immediately that I couldn't write that story without thinking about just mind-blowing the distance between my grandson and my dad in terms of the journeys they have done in life. So my dad was born in 1934 in a little sawmill town in central Virginia, Waverly, Virginia. Of course, it was the Jim Crow South. It was the Depression. And as soon as he could, he escaped that town. He met my mother there. My parents were best friends since they were age of 6. And so they would both eventually marry. But as soon as he could, out of high school, he went to college on a scholarship at North Carolina A&T in 1952 and lost the scholarship his second year, and so enlisted in the military. Now, we have often heard the story of the Great Migration, how 6 million African Americans left the Jim Crow South starting around 1910, all the way through the mid-70s. We don't often think about the migration going that long, but they left to escape the oppression of the South. What we don't talk about is how many African American, mostly men, enlisted in the armed forces for exactly the same reason, to escape oppression. And my dad was one of that wave that went into the armed forces. As a result of that, I was born in Japan. My parents lived in Japan for 9 of my first formative years, 9 years, and I was born there. What we have to focus on is that all of these leavings from the South to the North, industrial North, then later to the West and even to the Northwest, were not about leaving the South per se. It was ostracism. They were driven by white terrorism out of their homes. So they did not leave their family mentally. They did not leave their culture mentally. They did not leave their land. If they could hold on to the land, they left it. They kept it. And it has always been integral to the Black American experience to go back, to go back. We were ousted, and there's something about going back south, meeting family. When my dad got out, he's the baby of 13. I think most of them are in this picture. When he got out of the military, he started the Cooper Family Reunion that is now something like 45 years in running every single year. We even met online during COVID. The Black Family Reunion, okay? Ever since we left the continent, ever since we were kidnapped, stolen from the continent of Africa, we have been trying to find and hold on to our family. That was, of course, interrupted by the slave trade. emancipation, we started looking for those who were sold away from us, trying to reconnect. During the Great Migration, we go back to the family we found, okay? This is not a plot in Medea. It is not a Tyler Perry story. We think of the Black family reunion, you know, who brings the potato salad, who does the line dancing, which one is the drunk uncle, who does the barbecue pit. All of these are tropes that are based in a cultural inheritance around holding on to our families. And this is just more Cooper family reunion photos. So how do I translate all that into a children's book? What do I do? I think about the story about how Jax, my grandson, is now living in his great-grandfather's house in the South. How I moved because of my dad's dedication in the service. I moved around a lot, but always home was Virginia, a place I did not live. Okay, it's always going home, always going home. That is the genesis of Nothing Special. So for a child, Nothing Special is a buddy story, a story. How many kids universally have great connections with their grandparents, necessary connections with their grandparents, intimate relationships with their grandparents that they don't have with their parents because the parents are too busy parenting. I got a fabrication artist who took actual pictures of my dad and my grandson and turned them into stunning fabrication art. Beck Sloan is her name. She lives in the New Jersey area. She is into animation, stop animation, and you can see that because these figures are, they look like you would see in a short animation. And then she wove the details of my family story into the book. That hat that my dad was never without is in every picture of Nothing Special, except for when he takes it off and puts it on a picnic table, as my dad would do, take off his hat to eat. So this is my favorite spread in the book, and you can see how the book comes alive. I will read it to you. This is after Jax, who is goes from Detroit down south to visit his family in Virginia. And he has in his mind all of the things that he wants to do with his pop. And he's thinking city things like going to the movies and going to them, hanging out at the mall and maybe the zoo. And he wakes up the first morning in Virginia. "Good morning, Jax." His grandfather woke him with a kiss. "Good morning, Pop," Jax said, leaping out of his bed. "What are we going to do today?" "I think we'll do some of the things that I did as a boy," Pop said. "Like what?" Jax asked. Pop smiled and said, "Nothing special." And so they end up the whole day doing low-tech, intimate things that maybe a city kid wouldn't do in the South, even though people do a whole lot of things like urban gardening, etc., all over the place. But they shuck corn, they go crabbing because they live on coastal Virginia. They hand make a kite and go fly the kite. They look at shooting stars. They count fireflies. Those are all the low-tech, intimate, nothing special things they do. And of course, Jax thinks at the end that this is the most special thing ever. What we have in this spread is the duality of the story. The adult, probably the African-American adult reading this story, is going to recognize immediately the story of going back home, of going back to the South, and perhaps their connections in the South. And so on that level, they are looking at Pop with this Air Force veteran hat on. Okay, this man enlisted in the military. He's a vet. Because of his sacrifice for his country, he has provided a middle-class lifestyle for generations. How do we know that? We have the University of Michigan College insignia on Jackson's shirt, and we have the University of Virginia pennant in the back. What we also have are the emblems of Black ancestry in the quilts, which is iconic representation of Black culture. And so even subliminally, as they're reading this book, they're feeling that home vibe. They're feeling that connection to Black culture, not the trauma, but the culture, the triumph, the success coming out of the trauma. And they're also recognizing the history. What are the kids getting? Excitement. They're getting excitement over a trip, over reconnecting with family that they love, over this adorable little dog that's underneath the bed. And what are Jax and Pop Pop going to do in their adventure? So, and that's these two buddies. Yes, they were buddies outside swinging. So that's how I approach the storytelling of Nothing Special. And part of what I want to impart here is just sort of thinking and paying attention to, and even supporting a lot of the literature that's coming out now that may be based on the trauma, but tries to take our story one step forward into the triumph and the joy of Blackness, of living in this world as an African American. So I'm going to pause right there. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Amber, I know you've got that part covered.
I'll just jump in and ask my question and comment here. Hi, Desiree. You may or may not remember me. I'm Kofi Kumasi. I'm a professor here in the School of Information Science. And so I'm going to kind of phrase my question as a comment and help transition into the next panel. And I know we're going to take a break, but I think it'll be a nice transition to the next panel. So Desiree, so I know you through your work in journalism, and you wrote for the Detroit News, and we connected years and years ago, and you wrote a story about my mom and surviving gun violence with my sister. And it just made such an impact to have someone of your stature and the warmth and care you brought to that work to write that story in such a careful yet journalistic way. And then fast forward, I bought your book, Know the Mother, which if you haven't read, it's short stories, and it's wonderful format that I was actually very curious about how you shifted from journalism to short stories. So that may be a question embedded in there. But the bigger question or comment I have is your shift. You mentioned that your shift to writing children's literature sort of was in the reason being because you wanted to impact younger minds. And so I just kind of want to step back and say, have you felt like that's been some of the reception that you've received around this book, Nothing Special, in terms of our topic for today, in breaking barriers and dealing with issues of equity in information science? So, and as a teaser to our next panel before you respond, I'm going to be moderating a panel with a group of colleagues who are conducting research on diversity, and well, they edit a journal on diversity in youth literature. And so I'm going to just kind of make that thread between shifting in the writing genres. You've done journalism, you've done short stories, and now children's books. So what's the reception been, and how do you feel that impact of shaping young minds?
Wow, that's a lot.
I know, right?
It's so good to see you. It's so good to see you. And yeah, we go back a long way. It's been a pleasure knowing you these years. Well, I have to say, I mean, I think most people who write really do hope that one day their books will be noticed in some way. That's part of the reason you get it out there, is that as many hands can get it as possible. It's not easy. Children's book market is extremely competitive. It is frustrating. If you think about your regular books and the binding on the back of it, at least if it's on a shelf, you can actually read the title and the author because they're thick enough to embody that. Where children's books are this thin and there's thousands of them on shelves. how do you even get seen? Like, it's amazing that a book even gets picked up, right? But this book has won awards, and it's my first children's book, which makes it even harder. A brand new author in this very crowded arena. And so I do have to say that I do feel fulfilled in the way that the more recognition it got, the more hands, the more hands are on the book. I personally have taken the book into classrooms. I have had nonprofit organizations buy dozens of copies and give it to kids free. And I will come in and sign and talk about the book and the stories with kids. So I can tell you hands-on that indeed it gives them a different way to look at themselves, their family history, and what they love. When I did a presentation to a school in Pontiac, the classroom, it was third grade, and about half, well, a little bit more than half were African American, and much of the rest were Hispanic. And I speak like this much Spanish, so I tried to throw a little bit in there and engage the kids. And I got so many stories from the kids whose parents were in Mexico and how they go back to Mexico. What do they eat? What kinds of things do they play? I have a free activity guide that helps people sort of explore, what is your family story? What are your holiday foods? What things do you do that's different, because of your culture? So it goes across culture, but guess what? The entryway is African American culture instead of a mainstream American white way to get in. You know what I mean? We have stories like this everywhere, but when do you have white kids or Hispanic kids or Asian kids getting into that conversation through the lens of an African American perspective? You see what I'm saying? That's how I want it to branch out. It's more minds than just Black minds. It's a white kid looking at the book and saying, "Oh, that's like me and my granddaddy. I call my granddad Pop Pop too." Everyone can see themselves. We tend to think in literature that for everyone to see it, it has to be white, as opposed to for everyone to see it, it has to be universal. So that's the leap I'm trying to make with the book.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about that. You said it earlier, but the way you just rephrased it, it really capsized it very well about the humanity of writing children's book for, from a humanistic perspective. And yet we kind of know the white gaze. I mean, Toni Morrison talks about playing in the darkness. Whiteness in the literary imagination is that fact that you have this white gaze that says that, yes, you're somehow, always writing for white people, but she pushes back about that. She really just says a lot. What you just said is that when she's writing about African-American women in a small town in Ohio, that is a universal experience, and you can't enter into humanity through that channel. Why do we have to? Yeah. So I appreciate you clarifying, because I was looking forward to that. I see some questions in the chat. Amber, do you want to take back over? I don't want to take over.
And it looks like Leah McCoy also has her hand up, just FYI.
Yes, she has her hand up, but I'm going to try and go in order. Lily asked a question, but I think you answered it in your first response. She asks if you have any other contemporary kids books that successfully manage this balance of acknowledging trauma, celebrating culture to recommend.
I do. All right. First of all, I should have, maybe somebody off screen can Google this and put it in the chat for me. I'm sorry, I don't have it already cut and pasted. I just did an article for Oprah Daily. It was for Black History Month on this topic, and I make a recommendation of some books that I think celebrate Black culture, even though if we know those cultural ways came out of oppression, they are not lived that way anymore. They're lived as our joy and our triumph. So Oprah Daily, Desiree Cooper, and you might be able to find it. Look at that. Thank you, Joshua. This is a famous book, Crowns. It's like, come on, the haircut, and how proud that it's a rite of passage for a black male to take a young black boy into the barber shop and get that perfect cut, and how they feel, the sense of pride, what they're looking at. With the other books, illustrations are amazing. This is Derek Barnes and Gordon James, a huge award-winning book. Do I have time to do some of these? Some of the books I like? Okay. This one is called All the Places We Call Home. And the author is Patrice Gopo, G-O-P-O. And this is something that I really see opening up as well, that to be African American is bigger than, it's not monolithic. It can be African Caribbean, okay? And Africa isn't one thing. So South African American, Ghanaian American, etc. And so this story is a story, if we think of nothing special about North and South, this child has relatives in Africa. And it's kind of talking about the journey from Africa to the United States and the connections that this family is keeping to Africa. This is another big award winner. It's called Going Down Home with Daddy, and it's written by Kelly Lyons, Going Down Home with Daddy. Very similar. This is a kid that's on his way to the family reunion, and there's traditions there, one of which is you have to tell a story from the family history at the reunion. And he is traumatized because the whole time he cannot figure out what story he's going to tell. And so he's trying to figure that out during the whole story. And of course he does. One thing I want to say about the art, and this is something that I don't know how well this is translating, but this is something that I was talking about. In the watermarks behind the images are African, I'm not going to remember the tribe, but Sankofa, the African symbols of peace, of family, etc. are back there. And there's a bunch of hens in this grandmother's yard, but one of the hens is a guinea hen that you would see in Africa. So there's I call them dog whistles, just little connections that aren't screaming slave trade. That aren't screaming enslavement, and yet drawing a straight line between that experience and our contemporary joy. And I have to throw this one in, Ordinary Days. This is all about Prince, So it's written by a woman named Angela Joy. The colors are the purple colors, all the way through. It talks about Minneapolis and his life. But I just bring that up to say that there's so much that we've contributed to the arts and to entertainment, that having those sort of woven into our joyful stories as African Americans is also wonderful. So
Those look so cool. I'm gonna have to pick up a couple of them myself. It looks like Aaliyah is next to ask her question. Take it away.
Hi, Desiree. Thank you so much for joining us. This has just been really eye-opening. I'm African American Studies librarian here at Wayne, and also an aspiring writer of kids' books. And I was just wondering if you have any advice for someone like breaking into the field of literature, or I don't know, maybe just some of those first steps, or things like that you may have taken.
yeah, it's not easy. First of all, don't think it's easy because it's short and it's for children. So the book took me, I started it in 2019. It came out in 2022. I won't say that I was working on the manuscript that whole time. It probably took me a year to get the manuscript to where I wanted it. You have so much to select from, right? And what goes in, what takes out. But also, then I had to start revising it when I had the collaborator as the artist. How much of the story is in the pictures? And if it's in the picture, does it need to be in the words? So maybe you need to change the words. So let the picture tell a story, let the words tell a different story. So you have a whole lot more going on. So there's all that science that's kind of around collaborating with an illustrator. I was lucky because I was already a known entity, for one, in my journalism in Detroit, but then I also had the other book that Coffee mentioned. It's called Know the Mother. And I was active on social media, so that I had a way to take the audience from Know the Mother and introduce them to a children's book. And it didn't seem like that would be a good translation, but when you think about who's buying the books, it was women like me who had read my first book. And so I was able to sort of, connect with them. I think if you don't have those communities, if you're not going to those conferences, if you're not, the Highlight Foundation is wonderful. They do a whole bunch of workshops, and they're mostly all virtual now. They have retreats, but you've got to sort of get into that community because it's a different marketing process for children's books than it is for books for adult readers.
Thank you so much.
All right, we've got a question in the chat from Joshua. He says, you've brought together your conviction that joy is necessary in Black story and your very personal slice of your own family story in this book. Did the genesis of this book start with one or the other, or both together, or somewhere else?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was talking about when I saw that friendship between, so it started personal, and I saw the joy between my grandson and my dad. And so when I'm searching for a topic, I started right at home, and I'm like, these are buddies. I'm going to write an adventure for these buddies. But that was my superficial one-off thought. Oh, it's easy to write a children's book. I'm just going to write about this. And then when I thought, well, what about them? That took my brain into, how do I bring the miracle of the moment that someone that was born into the Depression, lived in Jim Crow, has a grandson, great-grandson in his own home that has none of those boundaries in front of him. How do I do that? And so I think in thinking about the story, you start thinking deeper into the meaning of the story, and then what can you use to symbolize or to just, do a nod to all of those things that you find important. But it started with simply observing around me, like, these two people are crazy, this 5-year-old and this 85-year-old. Like, what are they? You saw that picture. They're out swinging in the backyard. And my dad's in his pajamas. Like, that's just how nutty they were. And I thought, that isn't that fun? Until I also thought, isn't that a miracle?
All right, we've got, let's see, another question. This one is from Carolyn. Their question is there anything, ideas, cultural concern, etc., that you left out of the book that you originally wanted to include? If so, what was it and why you left that out?
Well, a big thing I left out is the other characters. So Jax has 2 little younger siblings who are also running around here. And my mom, the grandmother, like, what about her? And so, and honestly, if anyone's doing placemaking and homemaking and nurturing, it's the women in the family, So I thought of it this way: you can't tell all the stories at one time, and there would be a great opportunity for me to, I hope one day, do another book that focuses on the women and their connections. But I was grateful. It was a happy accident, but I was sort of grateful that the first one was males, was a young boy and someone that he looked up to and that loved him in his family that was also male. Because I don't think we see enough of that brotherly love, the love between men, depicted, Black men in particular. And so I was super happy that, well, that's a happy accident, but then I'll tell you, oh, I did this on purpose. I wanted to show Black men, blah, blah, but it wasn't that way. It just was in front of me. But I would definitely like to do something that acknowledges my mother's role in the family history as well.
Okay, we've got one more question from Joshua, and then we're going to end the question round so that we can take a quick break. So Joshua has also asked, I'm also interested in the process involved in getting WSU Press to commit to hiring Beck Sloan to illustrate your book. What resources, what negotiations had to be brought to the table to get that commitment?
So that is such a great question. My understanding, this is my first children's book, okay? So my understanding is when you generally do an illustrated children's book that is not self-published, but goes through a publisher, the publisher picks the manuscript and the publisher picks the illustrator. So unless you are a self-illustrator. So there was a chance that I would submit Nothing Special to a publisher and they would pick Joe Schmo, like, oh, we have this person in our, in our farm team or whatever you call it. And so we're going to pull this person up to do this book. I did not want that because I had met Beck and I had seen her work before. And I wanted it to be our team effort. And by virtue of me living, working, and being published before at Wayne State, they were open to looking at her work. And they agreed. Beck did presentation and storyboards and things like that. And they're like, yeah, this is going to be great. So after that, there is a separate negotiation with the illustrator from the author. And that's also very typical. I do know that ultimately they agreed that the work she's doing belongs to her. So even though, like, I don't have all those amazing little dolls and dogs and everything of my family, they're her possessions, they're her artwork. But the photos that went into the book belong to the press and the book itself. But that's atypical. And that was a reason for me to think that I did not want a major publisher publishing the book. It was a trade-off because I felt like I could really have more of a footprint on the story itself and how it came out. And with a major publisher, they would take it and then, do what they do with it. And that includes the title, that includes the cover art. They decide all of those things. The author may be able to say yay or nay, but very often it's like, we know what's best. We know the colors. We know the season. We know the audience. So thank you for your book, but this is how we're going to go. And maybe it's because the story was about my family. I just felt like I couldn't let go of that much. Not to say that Wayne did not weigh in on all of those things, because they did, but it was a discussion with us. It wasn't out of my hands.
All right. Thank you so much, Desiree, for your presentation. Your book looks absolutely beautiful, the illustrations, and it's great to see, like you were explaining before, the relationship between two Black men, or rather a Black child and a Black man. So thank you. We are going to take a 5-minute break. We will 4 or 5-minute break. We will reconvene at 1 o'clock for the panel. So, get up, use the restroom, grab a snack, do anything you need to do. We will reconvene again at 1:01. And thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you so much. This has been a great morning so far. Just thank you. I gave you guys a couple extra minutes, so we are back. And we are just in time for a final session of the day. It is our faculty panel, which will focus on diverse youth literature research and the overall state of the field. Today, we are joined by Kafi Kamasi, who will be moderating, and our panelists, Sarah Parks-Dallin and Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez. Kafi Kamasi is a professor in the School of Information Sciences. She is a leader in research on critical youth literacy and libraries. Her scholarship engages critical theoretical explorations of the intersections of culture, race, and schooling as means to help prepare future and practicing library and information science professionals to meet the needs of all learners. Her work has been funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and recognized by the National Center for Institutional Diversity. Kamasi received her bachelor's degree in education from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, her MLIS degree from Wayne State University, and her PhD from Indiana University, Bloomington. Next, our first of two panelists, Sarah Park-Dahlen. Sarah joined the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois as an associate professor in August 2021. She previously served as an associate professor of library and information science at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Dahlen's research addresses Korean adoption in children's literature, Frank Carpenter and Francis Carpenter's writings for children, and diversity in children's literature and library education. She is co-editor of the scholarly journal Research on Diversity in Youth Literature with Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez, who is also here with us today. Sarah is also co-editor of the Harry Potter and the Other, Race, Justice, and Difference in the Wizarding World with Ebony Elizabeth Thomas, and co-creator of the 2015 and 2018 Diversity in Children's Book Infographics with David Hook, which are based on data from the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the School of Education at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And last, but certainly not least, Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez. Sonia is a professor in the English department at LaGuardia Community College, CUNY, where they teach composition, literature, and creative writing. Sonia Alejandra received their PhD in English from the Department of English at the University of California, Riverside. Their research introduces conocimiento narratives as a way to read realist fiction with Latinx children's and young adult literature. They are currently working on a monograph on this topic. Sonia Alejandra earned an MFA in creative writing fiction from the City College of New York, CUNY. They've participated in writing workshops at Tin House, VONA, and Quelly. So I will let Kafi take it away and let's get started.
All right, thank you, Amber. And thank you again, Sonia and Sarah, for agreeing to participate. I think this, if you weren't a part of the earlier sessions, I think there's some really good natural segues between our previous presenters. For example, Sonia writing children's books, being a children's author, and our last speaker, Desiree Cooper, really has transitioned from journalism to writing for, more adult fiction, and then children's lit. So I think this is a really nice panel we've got here. And I wanted you all to really speak on the particular aspect of, obviously, editing. You're editors of the Journal on Research and Diversity. Is it Research and Diversity in Youth Literature?
Research on Diversity in Youth Literature. So the acronym is RDYL. We call it RIDDLE. And oftentimes the acronym is misspelled as RYDL. But if you think that it's youth literature at the end, then it's RDYL.
Got it. Thank you for that. Yeah. That'll help me. And so I really thought this would be a nice way to a lot of people don't know that we have a dedicated journal for research on diversity in youth literature. And so that's a starting point. But before I get into the questions I have related to your work for the editorial work you're doing with the journal, I wanted to allow you a few minutes to just introduce yourselves and kind of tell how you came to this work. Anything you'd like to share from the both of you, and maybe starting with Sarah, anything you'd like to share about how you came to this work, and particularly maybe the journal weave itself in there too.
Sure. So when you say how you came to this work, do you mean studying diversity in children's books, or the journal itself? Sorry.
I really want to give you an opportunity to talk about your positionality and how you enter this field, and
okay.
How you found your way to this particular role.
Oh, I have done this multiple times for the past few weeks. So it's like a script memorized in my head, but I will try to be brief. Was a huge reader growing up, read everything under the sun, never saw myself in children's books. So common among people of our generation. I saw a couple of Asian Americans that were not Korean American. I am Korean American. I should add that I'm not adopted. That is my research area, but I am not a transracially adopted Korean. Yeah, when I was in grad school, Linda Sue Park, first Korean American to win the John Newbery Medal for a single shard. At the same time, Anna won the Prince Medal for A Step from Heaven. And a single shard is set in 12th century Korea and features a male orphan. And A Step from Heaven features a Korean American immigrant daughter. And so as much as I love A Single Shard, there was so much about A Step from Heaven that resonated with me. It was the first time I really saw myself in children's literature. There were, issues of patriarchy and language and pressure to do well in school, domestic violence, so many things that I dealt with in my own childhood. So I began, and also at the same time, I had found Eve Bunting's Smoky Night, a picture book set in the 1992 Los Angeles uprisings. I found that in a bookstore. I'm from Los Angeles. I was 12 when the uprisings happened. My dad owned a grocery store in a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood. And finding this book that told the story of something I lived through just blew my mind. But the story was not told from the perspective of a Korean American. It was told from the perspective of an ambiguously brown child, which is completely valid to have that story, obviously, from his perspective, because they lived through it too. But it just made me curious. Are there children's books out there about Korean Americans who lived through the LA uprisings? And that's what kind of got me started on this journey. So yeah, and Sonia, if you'd like to share.
Sure. Thank you so much for this. I'm super excited to be here and share space with all of you. Similar to Sarah, I was a very avid reader as a young person, shy, very introverted. My family migrated to the US from Mexico when I was about 5 years old. I grew up undocumented, and books were really like a safe space for me, right? If we think about like the politics around growing up undocumented in the US, there's a lot of silence, a lot of policing. I couldn't really make connections in a safe way, and so books were where I made friends and tried to find myself. But as Sarah mentioned, a lot of the books that were available to me centered white protagonists, white young girls, and I tried really hard to see myself in them. I wanted to be Ramona Quimby. I wanted to explore and be out there, but that just unfortunately wasn't the reality of my childhood. And so as I got older and into my teens, that contradiction of what I was reading to what I was experiencing in my life became a source of tension and anger and conflict. And it wasn't until in high school where an alum, not even a teacher, an alum from the high school had given me a book, Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya, a very popular Chicano lit novel that centers a young Chicano boy in the Southwest. And that was the first time I had seen a Chicano in a book. And it was just through that engagement that I started just being curious, like, are there other stories about people like me? And as I went to college and found more mentors and found more support systems, I started learning about Latino studies and ethnic studies and BIPOC literature, which then led to graduate school. It feels just like a snowball effect. You want to just keep learning, trying to heal all these experiences and wounds right from childhood. And I think that's essentially what's been the foundation of me researching Latina children's literature and why I focus on healing, right? It starts from this childhood wound and me trying to understand how does literature impart, practice, represent a healing process, because unfortunately a lot of the wounds that I experienced as a child dealing with immigration and domestic violence and racism and a lot of the isms are still very prevalent today. So I'm just very much committed to figuring out what do books offer, how do books save lives. And through my networking, I was able to connect with Sarah and get started and work with Riddle. And I think I've been with Riddle for 4 years. I think.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So let's jump right into some questions about Riddle. And I think, again, this is asking you to switch your hat a little bit because, you know, you each wear faculty roles and hats and a lot of different hats. But let's shift over into your editorial hat for the journal. So my first question is, can you share some insights into the current landscape of research on diverse youth literature and how has it evolved over time? What are some of the notable trends or developments you've observed? And let's start with Sonia first.
Sure. I think since we started Riddle, or since my participation in Riddle, we've seen diversity grow within this field. I think largely right now, as we do data for like Riddle, we've seen that there's been an increase in submissions, particularly relating to the LGBTQI community. We're starting to see more research on Asian American children's literature. We're starting to get more submissions from like what we're calling like insider authored scholarship, right? Or what might be similar to like own voices. We could talk about what that might mean. And essentially like Riddle Write has become the space to fill in a lot of these gaps that have existed in more popular mainstream children's literature journals, and to give space to the voices that have been working like in the background, right? Because folks have been doing this scholarship and this research, there just might not have been like a space for them before. Do you want to add something else, Sarah?
Yeah, I thought maybe, you know, asking how has it evolved over time, maybe we could share a little bit about our origin story. There was a panel called The Needs of Minority Scholars at the 2016 Children's Literature Association Conference. And I've been a member of CHLA since 2005 or 2006. And so, and I had a really soft entry into CHLA. I knew a lot of the board members and longstanding members because of my affiliation here with the University of Illinois. And I was one of very few people of color who attended the conference in the 2000s. In 2016, there were a lot more BIPOC attending CHLA, and it was causing tension in the organization, as often happens when more people of color enter a predominantly white female space, right? And so a colleague of ours, Catherine Slater, invited us, me, Marilisa Jimenez Garcia, Ebony Elizabeth Thomas, and Laura Jimenez to speak on a panel called The Needs of Minority Scholars. And we did, and it was standing room only. I mean, it was just a tremendously emotional and also like really powerful panel. And a lot of graduate students shared with us some of the experiences, the racist experiences they had as grad students in trying to conduct research on their own experiences and or representations of their own experiences in literature and what a hard time they were having with their advisors and things like that. Anyway, we were all junior faculty at the time. And as I'm sure everybody here knows, and for promotion purposes and things like that, what really counts are publications. And so after the conference ended, Catherine rounded us up and proposed to publish our panel in the association's journal, Children's Literature Association Quarterly. And the Quarterly declined and said they didn't think it was scholarship. And so we immediately turned around and proposed it to the Lion and the Unicorn. And these two journals are the two biggest journals of our field. And the Lion and the Unicorn was like, we have room in our next issue. Can you get us these essays, you know, in a month or something? And so they published it right away. And those essays are now taught in classes across the country, children's literature studies classes across the country. I constantly have younger Asian American scholars coming up to me and saying, I read your essay and I cried. Anyway, but after that, we were like, if the association's own journal will not publish this important conversation that we need to have, then maybe we should start our own journal. So long story short, at the time, Gabrielle Halko was in on the conversations, and she and I decided that we would be the inaugural co-editors for the journal. Our first issue was themed Mirrors and Windows, based on Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors, and we invited people to submit essays where they were writing about representations of which, they shared some kind of identity category. So I think our journal over time has created space for more of these conversations. As Sonia shared, we have seen a lot of submissions relating to LGBTQ literature, and that has been really exciting for us that people see our journal as a safe space for their scholarship. For a while, we weren't seeing as many submissions on Asian American youth literature, which made me a little bit sad. And then we started seeing more, and it was exciting. So those are some of the things that have changed over time. I also think just having an open access journal has it's something a lot of journals are talking about, right? Accessibility. And so I think more journals are trending toward at least having that conversation and making some of their issues open access, maybe for a limited time or whatever, but we have been open access from the start. So,
Thank you. So following up on two things, I'm going to pivot a little bit and kind of merge in something. Sonia, you talked about, own voices and what is own voices. And then Sarah, you talked about what is scholarship really. I mean, if Light and Unicorn, Light and Unicorn would accept it as a journal and Childlit wouldn't. Let's talk about terms and the meaning. So either one of you can talk about what's your definition of own voices and your definition of scholarship, just kind of trying to talk through how those work and how they play into your role as editors of the journal.
The term own voices, and Sarah, please jump in, because I think
Corinne
you wrote,
Dubitz, 2015.
you wrote the chapter on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, I think it was just like a response to the publishing industry's desire for diversity and a push and a movement for diverse representation in children's books, but that representation or that diversity was coming from white authors. And so while we were pushing for diversity and we got some, there was still sort of an issue with who was telling these stories and also who was profiting from these stories, right? And so this term, right, own voices, was created, and Sarah, to indicate, right, that these are stories coming from people who have similar experiences as the protagonist or as the topic or theme of a story. And the term has evolved, and whether it's useful now or not, whether it's been co-opted by the publishing industry, debates, right? But essentially for Riddle, when we consider what we're looking for and what we've seen a lot more is scholarship by authors who might relate to the books that they're talking about, right? Who might share an identity, who might share a similar experience. And we're seeing a lot more of that as Riddle grows and as we continue to work with the journal.
And Sonia used the word co-opted, and that's because there was an incident, or maybe multiple incidents, a few years ago, where, if my memory serves me correctly, publishers or a marketing person or someone really wanted someone who was not out as LGBTQ to out themselves in order to sort of be able to label a book own voices, #own voices, and market it in that way. And that person really did not want to identify in that way. People are allowed to identify however they want to. And so a lot of people in the industry got really angry that marketing and publishers were co-opting own voices in this way. And so We Need Diverse Books came out with a statement saying we are no longer using #own voices. Please, if you are going to label something or someone, just be as specific as possible in the ways that the creator, right, does. So if I were to publish a book, I would want someone to identify me as a Korean American. So don't just say broadly Asian American, because there are so many different countries from which we hail. So specifically, I would want someone to say Korean American. So those were some of the guidances that came out around the same time that We Need Diverse Books put out a statement about own voices.
And by scholarship, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just one quick follow before you define scholarship. And that goes back to what Desiree said about being very specific. And I didn't think about how brilliant that is to get young kids to understand the diversity of even the African continent by talking. You call someone Ghanaian American. If we could, we're starting to kind of discover and uncover our roots with the Henry Gates, as African Americans, with Henry Gates finding our roots. So you know, how educational would it be if we were more specific, even in how we talk about ourselves as Asian Americans, African Americans, you know, people of color. So sorry to cut you off, Sonia.
No.
Scholarship.
No, that's great, and that's exactly the point. And I think that was kind of the feeling, the desire for like the hashtag own voices, right? That there's so much gap, and the publishing industry has just sort of taken diversity as this like hegemonic like identity that didn't like acknowledge the diversity within diversity. But I mean, capitalism and the publishing industry and capitalism, right, sort of turned it into something else. For Riddle, we consider scholarship very much the way that like academia defines scholarship, right? It's research based from different like fields related to youth literature. So our journal publishes traditional like literary analysis, but we also have articles from library information science, from education, from folks in the field like librarians, both teachers. I think what I appreciate about our journal as well is that we have a section like that we call like a forum, and we also consider that scholarship, where those like first hand personal like experience that relates to like diversity in youth literature. The difference, because we're in academia, is that the articles are peer reviewed and the forum is not, right? And peer reviewed means, right, that it's we take out like identity markers such as names, previous publications, so that a peer review, right, someone in the field who's an expert in this field as well as the topic of the article, can give us an honest review of the quality of the article. And that means something in academia as you're moving up toward promotion.
That leads me to a comment and a question. So if the forum section is allowing authors, writers, creators to, you know, really express themselves unvetted, and that counts as scholarship, would you consider that as working towards this broader decolonial effort of making academia work towards the ends of people of color as opposed to vice versa? And then that would lead me to, if you've seen any, I would say groundbreaking, but studies or contributions that were really like, wow, this would not be published were it not for us providing this space. I think that's kind of what you're saying, but maybe there's a few examples you can speak to.
Yeah, so we have published, I don't know how many forum now, like one of the first ones we did was March for Our Lives, around youth activism and gun safety. And we actually included the voices of young people in that as well. We have less control over the promotion and tenure standards at various universities. Like we just have no control over that, right? But if we can provide space for people to publish something to get their ideas out there, it is editorially reviewed. It is just not anonymously reviewed, the forum pieces. They're still going to be really high quality. They're a little bit shorter. They tend to be thematic. And so we had, I think, 5 or 6 short pieces in our March for Our Lives forum. We've also had a mentoring forum that was published in the format of an interview. And those contributions, I think, are really, really valuable and more immediately accessible because they don't take as long to get published, right? They don't have to go out for review and things like that. And I think what we want to say is like these contributions are also really, or these conversations are also really important to have. We think our readers, the readers of our journal, need to hear from the voices of young people who are fighting for their lives with, you know, gun control, safety, and things like that. And so I do think that there is a great purpose in having these forums because of the immediacy of what we're able to publish through them. And then like our mentoring forum, it came out of the IRSCL conference, the International Research Society for the Study of Children's Literature. There were a couple panels where there was a younger scholar and a more senior scholar together giving papers, and another student Roxana was like, how did this happen? Like, I guess she had not yet seen that kind of relationship a lot. And so she was just really curious, like, how did this happen? And we just started a conversation and thought, hey, maybe we can have this conversation recorded and published in our journal so other people can also see how these relationships formed and how the senior scholar really cared for and mentored the more junior scholar and helped them, you know, get into an international conference or work together. I shouldn't say help them, because I really believe it was very much a partnership. Work together to submit this panel where there were like papers written by a junior and a senior scholar. And so that is one of the things we really care about with our journal, mentoring emerging scholars. And so having a forum that directly addressed that was something that really reflected our what we care about, our values. So the second part of your question was, you're asking specifically about our journal. Have we published anything that has been groundbreaking?
You could consider that.
Okay.
Like, wow, you know,
All
I'm
right.
really glad this space. It came across your
Yeah.
desk. You're
Okay.
proud of it, you
All
know,
right.
kind of proud moment.
Yeah, I feel like this question is planted because if you have not heard of us, you've probably heard of one of the articles that we published in 2019. We published an article called "The Cat is Out of the Bag." White supremacy or Orientalism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness in Dr. Seuss's children's books. And I believe that Katie Ishizuka and Ramon Stevens, the authors, deliberately chose our journal. We were brand new at that time because we're open access and they really wanted their work to be publicly available. So we were thrilled when we got it because it was such a great article, and we knew that as an open access journal, it was going to be accessible to a lot of people who needed to read it. When we started the journal, we intentionally made it open access because we wanted people in publishing who might not have access to academic databases to be able to read our work, because we wanted them to be impacted by the things that our authors were saying. Anyway, so 2019, I think it was February, we published the article, and it went viral to the extent that things go viral at that time. In February 2021, oh, and I should back up and say, like, because of the way our software is set up, we can see the back end, who is not exactly who is downloading, but we can see that the Department of Defense had downloaded our essay. Penguin Random House, which publishes Suits, had downloaded our essay. We could see, like, on that level who, and of course, like, schools and libraries and universities all over the world had downloaded the essay. So in February 2021, I texted Gabrielle and I said, hey, I was just looking at the statistics and the article has been downloaded around 90,000 times, which is a huge number for any academic article. And I said to her, I bet by Dr. Seuss's birthday on March 2nd, the article is going to be downloaded over 100,000 times. I bet it'll increase by about 10,000. Well, guess what? On March 2nd, 2021, Seuss Enterprises made an announcement early in the morning that they were ceasing publication of 6 of his books, including And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street and If I Ran the Zoo, which are 2 of his most popular books, because they contained content that was harmful. And so I was like, hey, you misspelled racist. But that announcement made wall-to-wall coverage all day long on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and Breitbart. That article was being downloaded at the rate of like 2,000 an hour. And at present has been downloaded more than 300,000 times. So when you're asking, like, have we published anything that has made an impact? Like, I'd like to think, I have no hard evidence, but I like to think that the essay being out there for those 2 years before Seuss Enterprises made that decision, I'm sure someone at Seuss Enterprises has read it. And other people who are adjacent to Seuss Enterprises have probably read it. And I like to think that our article helped make that decision. But broader than that, just knowing that so many people in so many different types of institutions, schools and libraries and universities and publishing companies, hope that they read it and they were like, I'm thinking about this in a new way now. I have not known this before, and now I know it, and now I'm responsible for knowing it. And so this is going to change how I do my work moving forward. So anyway, Sonia, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we also have special issues that are guest edited by folks that are not myself or Sarah, where we invite and encourage folks who are interested in putting together a special issue. And I think even though those haven't gone as viral as the Seuss essay, it really speaks to one, like folks' passion and diversity, right? Because to be a special guest editor is a lot of work for a journal. And so just the commitment to their topic. And then also just like bringing those voices together in a conversation of a specific topic. The one that I'm constantly like citing from our own journal is the special issue on like queer youth literature. Is just such a beautiful collection, or it should probably be a book. It's such a beautiful like issue of essays talking about the importance and the necessity of queer youth lit. We also had like a wonderful special issue on like diversity in graphic novels. That also again just sort of highlights the importance of graphic novels, destigmatizes graphic novels for like young readers. It and again, just being a co-editor of this journal, like I get to learn so many books that I know are my like to be read list. I know I've heard at some point, have not gotten to, but remind me of how important they are. And then, I mean, I'm not going to give a lot of spoilers, but we have a special issue on like banned and challenged books, and just having like edited, read those essays just recently. I'm so excited for the conversation that's being put out there by the folks who are contributing to this special issue. We have a very powerful forum in that a special issue. And so I think like we just have like these opportunities as a journal. And I love, Kavi, how you said like, we're trying to decolonize like what an academic journal is to the best of our ability while still working in academia. And it's by emphasizing and highlighting these important conversations that are not happening in other journals.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to little bit pivot back to technology, because Sarah mentioned a lot of things about technology that we could spend a lot of time on, but I kind of want to maybe drill it to AI, because you talked about being able to technology, open access is one aspect of technology. You talked about being able to see the back end and see who your users are. You talked about virality and how things go viral in this era of social media. What about AI? Are there any intersections of AI with your journal? And if so, and maybe tying it back to this topic of today about equity and issues of equity in our field, how is AI intersecting with your work? And if so, do you see any ethical or equity issues, which could be interrelated? And a shameless plug while you're speaking about special issues, they do take a lot of work, and I want to just shout out a special issue that I edited on hip hop and library and information science, and that was published in the Journal for Information Diversity and Inclusion. And I think maybe my co-editor, well, the editor-in-chief, Vanessa Irvin, might be here, but yes, it is definitely a lot of work, but I think it's some of the best work when you can look and see the field in a broad landscape view and really see some of the best minds come together. It makes you really proud to be a part of something like that. So anyway, so your thoughts on AI and how that might intersect with issues of equity and children's and youth diversity in your journal.
I mean, I think broadly, we have to be really careful with AI, right? Because AI is not as intelligent as we want it to be. And especially when it comes to what it has learned, like what it has learned is probably like white supremacist stereotypes. We don't really use AI with our editing, actually. So I don't know, Sonia, like I was trying to think of how to answer this question, and
what about the aspect of research data analysis? So we're seeing a lot more. Would you
see.
be accepting of a journal article that said, if they were explicitly saying how they used AI to help realize the themes they're finding in their research, for example? Have you run across anything like that yet? It could be anything.
Yeah, sure. No, I don't think we have considered that in any of our submissions so far. And yeah, I guess like as an editorial team, we would talk about how to approach that and how to incorporate like evaluating that as part of our review of the essay. Because these tools are available and we need to know how best to use them. I just hear so much from my writer friends about how AI is impacting them as creative writers, and certainly in scholarship, yeah, we definitely have to know how to use it ethically. We have not come across it yet, and I don't know if it's just the essays that we have been getting have not disclosed to us, and we have not seen evidence that someone has used AI in their research. But Sonia, you were also about to say something.
Yeah, I think if someone wanted to submit something to Riddle about AI in the classroom and like children's books and the way that's impacting like pedagogy or classroom instruction, we would be open to like reviewing it. But what I was thinking about, and I was saying, I'm a community college faculty person, and so I teach freshmen and sophomore comp a lot, and so a lot of my students use AI for their assignments. And my policy on my syllabus is it's a tool. Use it carefully, make sure you understand the tool. But what is happening is that they do not know how to use the tool, and it would just take less time if they just read the assignments and wrote the original assignment than for them to figure out how to use the AI tool appropriately. But I was thinking about this in terms of like what we saw during the pandemic and like, are we post-pandemic? In terms of like the low number of submissions that we were getting, and thinking about the quality of writing and the work and the submissions that we were getting, and how the pandemic really affected everyone's writing at all levels, right? Thinking about like my freshman students all the way up to like senior scholars submitting or asking questions about the journal, thinking about how our writing, our craft of writing, our skills as writers are waning, and we're struggling with those. And I'm kind of curious to see in the future, right, how AI can be a tool instead of like a crutch, to say just write this email for me, but or write this essay for me, write this analytical paragraph for me, but teaching, right, like media literacy, teaching, and then like technology literacy, teaching young people and grad students. You could use it for revision, right? You could use it as an idea brainstorm partner, versus depending on like, write this entire thing for me, please get an A.
I don't want to belabor this point, but it does also kind of dovetail into our topic of publishing and writing children's literature. So for example, AI has a illustration generation generator tool that is really fascinating. If you haven't used Dolly, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dolly, and I'm just really it's not really for you, it's just maybe for the people in the chat as well to hey Vanessa, I see you in the chat, to comment on where we see the future of children's illustrations given AI's really powerful and fascinating ability to create. So you can put a query in. For those of you who are not familiar, similar to AI being a language model, Dolly is like an image model. So it collects images, and you can ask it a query to create an image. You can say, like, I literally did this. I wrote a children's book for my son's brand. It's called Turnover Buffs. And I asked it to create, I did a series, like I wrote the story and then asked Dolly to tell me to create a picture based on these elements of a character that I wanted to create. And it was fascinating what came back. Now, I think in terms of publisher, like Desiree, if you guys weren't here, she was talking about, major publishers still do want to choose your illustrator and still have a level of control over that. But the bigger question, I was like, who owns this? What just came back to me? Who owns that? I mean, I came up with the query, and it was, I thought a very sophisticated query, but does that mean I own the image? I don't know.
Yeah.
These are
And
questions.
I'm thinking of Sophia Noble's algorithms of oppression. Like whatever you put in determines what is put out, right? So what we put up on the internet it like helps to determine the outputs. Like she has a whole chapter where she talks about like the Google, sentence completion. Women should stay home. Women should not work. Women should not speak. When that happened a few years ago, she has a whole section where she addresses that. And so, yeah, there's so it's what I was saying earlier about like AI has to learn something, and oftentimes what they learn is stereotypes. And then also the copyright issue, like we have to read the fine print to see who owns this image that was created. And I think also about all of the illustrators I know who don't make their artwork digitally, right? Like Jason Chen literally had like talks about the paintbrushes. Gregory Kresge was telling me about all the different paintbrushes that he has purchased, and the hair on this animal and the hair on that animal. And I don't know to what extent, I don't remember to what extent he maybe like starts with paint and then maybe digitally manipulates it later, but I know that he starts with paint. And I know that Jason Chen starts with actual paint with his hand, you know? And I've heard Don Tate talk about how when he shifted from manually drawing and painting and using, I forgot the machine that he uses, but now he also uses a digital machine, and how that was such a big deal to him to shift in that way. And you know, artists are always adapting to new technology. This feels a little scary though with AI, because how much of it is yours, like you asked, and how much of it is the AI, the machine?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that could be a special topic. And you know, if you need
Yeah.
some topics for your journal, that would be, because you could talk about AI. Like I said, Tess and I we're considering writing just a piece on how we're using the different tools to conduct data analysis and the pitfalls and the benefits of doing that and the ethical issues. But I can see the same issues coming up in your journal, and you could just tailor it to children's lit, and those things that Sophia Noble writes about, well, I can be sure that would be prevalent in the journal. So let us move ahead to some other questions that might be beneficial for the audience. So let's talk about intersectionality. So we know intersectionality is a crucial aspect of diversity. And how do you ensure that your research journal acknowledges, addresses intersecting identities such as race, gender, sexuality, ability, and socioeconomic status? We talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious if there's some sort of guide rails you have in the editorial process.
Sure. Intersectionality is part of our like mission statement, like on our website. It's at the forefront of who we are, right? And so we're hoping that when folks want to submit to our journal, right, they do a little bit of research on who we are and see the mission statement, and that they're submitting articles that fit this mission. As co-editors, Sarah and I read these pieces carefully with the mission in mind, and we read with like our hats on for like diversity. Like if they are talking about intersectionality, is it essentializing an identity? If it is, what kind of feedback can we provide as editors in chief that will push the writer to like, well, can you rework this? We need this type of research. Or you're talking about Black and Brown children, but you're only citing white scholars. Can you cite more diversely? And it feels like it depends on like we take it essay by essay depending on like the identity of like the books that are being written about how the writers are presenting themselves. And Sarah and I don't pretend to be like experts in all of the identities, diverse identities. And so when we feel like it's beyond the scope of what we can do, we reach out to our executive board. Can someone is someone an expert in this field that can echo or chime in to this conversation? We're very careful to make sure that the articles that are being published don't create any harm, right? Because what we want when we're focusing about diversity, it's not just about a celebration, right? But it's about changing like these larger systems of oppression. And if we're putting out work that is either minimizing, erasing, essentializing, or creating any sort of harm, like we're only encouraging these systems of oppression. And so we're very careful and cautious with how our mission is being emphasized in these articles.
Well, I'm going to be a teacher and I'm going to say the class can get out early. We're going to ask a final question because I really think this has been a really good conference and I want to make sure we give people energy as we wind down. So my final question, and we're going to open it up for questions is, what advice do you have for emerging scholars or graduate students interested in conducting research in diverse youth literature? Are there any emerging areas or topics within the field you think hold particular promise for future research?
We loved this question when we were talking earlier. We love it. As we shared earlier, we pay a little bit more attention if we know that the author is an emerging scholar. One of the reasons why is because we think emerging scholars are doing some of the most exciting work. They're asking new questions, they have different lived experiences, and we want to the extent possible, provide a platform for that. So if you are an emerging scholar here in this space, we encourage you to attend conferences, share your work, get feedback, believe in what you're doing, and then submit to a journal, whether it's ours or another one that's a good fit for your work. If you end up with a reviewer number 2 who does not understand like the diverse aspect of whatever it is that you're doing, then know that that's not you, that's them. And maybe that journal is not a good fit. And also the editor should have mediated that. If it was a bad review, if there was something racist in the review, the editors really should have mediated that. But yeah, we're, like one of the things about the Children's Literature Association, as I shared when I first started going 10 years ago, it was 10 years ago, 20, oh my gosh, I can't count, almost 20 years ago, there were hardly any people of color. And last year, our journal hosted the BIPOC breakfast, and a full quarter of attendees registered to come to our breakfast. And so it is a really exciting time to not only study diversity in youth literature, but also to be someone who is underrepresented in this predominantly white field. So we're just really excited for emerging scholars, and we would like to support them in any way we can. But yeah, Sonia, what do you think?
I just write. If you consider yourself a writer, right, academic writer, creatively, like you need to write. You need to get a standing desk, sit down. You need words on the page, right, at the end of the day, right, because you need something to present. Or if you're looking to get published, you need to have written something. If you want to present at a conference, you need your PowerPoint slides, or do folks use PowerPoint? I don't know. You need to have a presentation or something. Yeah, try to get a writing practice, a writing group, a writing buddy.
Is that what you've done, Sarah? I mean, Sonia, I just wanted to pick your brain just a tiny bit about because that's the balance that you're doing right now with creative and then teaching and faculty. How are you balancing the creative side?
Not very well.
Okay, good. Because I'm like,
not very well. Because it's tough, right? It's really hard when you're so passionate about many things. But it is about like time management and trying to make space for writing and figuring out for my creative writing, I need to be like in a certain like mood and like a frame of mind, right? And I could do that easier in the evening after I've done all of my like faculty responsibilities and I'm at home and I'm safe and comfortable. I could focus creatively. If I know I need to revise a chapter, write an article, an essay, I could write at work, right? Because like my faculty hat is on. So it's about just sort of finding the space and finding the time. I'm in New York City, so writing in the subway, thinking, listening, right? All of that is writing. And I've learned a lot from creative writing in terms of like how to improve my academic writing and creating a writing practice. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of like writing workshops for academic writers in the way that we have writing workshops for creative writing. And so I've tried to take some of that creative writing practice into my academic writing.
Thank you. And I'll just say the two students of ours who presented today did an excellent job. So that was very refreshing. And like Sarah said, the younger voices are it's exciting to see, and it's exciting to hear how they digested history and then brought it with contemporary issues. So I'm excited about the future as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Amber, who's probably been monitoring the chat a little better. If you want to take up any question you've seen from the chat. Otherwise, thank you, ladies. I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, we're happy to take questions. And also I heard that there was some great presentations earlier. And, you know, if anyone's thinking of a PhD as well, like we love to talk about that. And, you know, Coffee has gotten a PhD, and any of your professors can talk to you about that process too. So yeah, but we're happy to take questions.
I see a lot of thanks for insight and putting links in here.
I have a quick question. I was just wondering, I know you guys touched a little bit on Dr. Seuss's work, and I was wondering, this is just random, but does the book The Sneetches ever come up in like academic research? Because I know that, you know, kind of sheds a light on discrimination practices, but I don't often hear it discussed.
Sure, that was a part of the essay. So if you want to, they talked about the Lorax, the Sneetches, they counted every single human character across like 50 books or something, and looked at the ways that each person of color was racialized, and they looked at like power relations and things like that. But it was a 50-page comprehensive essay, and one of the things they did address comprehensively is the Sneetches. I should also shout out Dr. Philip Nell, who has also published scholarship on Dr. Seuss. And if I recall correctly, he has also addressed that. So yeah, so here, I'll just put his name in the chat.
Thank you. I was just curious.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Joshua asked us to talk about IOPN. So IOPN is the Illinois Open Publishing Network. And as soon as like I shared in the chat that we moved from St. Catherine University to the University of Illinois. I started in fall 21, and so it took us about a year to move the journal over. So IOPN is the open publishing platform at Illinois, and Dan Tracy and the other staff there have been nothing but helpful. They have been like, it's been a huge learning curve, even for someone whose PhD is in library and information science. Just setting up the journal has been a huge learning curve. And so Dan and Alex and the other folks have been really helpful in just answering our questions and helping us set up the journal there. And then it's, you know, there's lots of journals that are hosted by IOPN. We're just one of them. And the process, the back end process is a little bit complicated, but we're getting used to it. You know, it's set up well to review and to comment and to copy edit, and there's just all this functionality that's new in learning. And then we publish like every 6 to 8 months or so. And so there are certain things that we don't do, and then we do them again in 6 months, and we're like, how do we do this again? So yeah, there are more everyday tasks, and then there are tasks that we do only once in a while. But yeah, the staff there has been really great. And I should say that the B-Press staff at the platform we use at St. Kate's, we had our customer support person on speed dial because they were so great at helping us when we had issues.
I'm thinking about, as you're looking for the next question,
yeah.
Beth Urban would be a great resource if you're not already using her. I'm just amazed at her ability to manage the front end, the back end, and the indexing and making sure it's indexed properly. And it's always, you know, your finger is on the pulse of where it's indexed and make sure it, you know, the H.
Everything. Miriam, just really quick, thank you so much for your offer of support. Yeah, we're always looking for people to serve as reviewers. So if you just want to send us an email, riddlejournal@illinois.edu. It's on the front page of our website, and share with us some of your areas of expertise, whether it's content or methods or theory. We can add you to our database, and we'd be happy to start a relationship with you. So yeah, thank you for that offer.
Always looking for reviewers, right?
Always. Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate it. I thought this was excellent, but I'm gonna turn it over to Amber for our closing remarks.
There we go. Had many buttons to press. Also, I was checking the chat to make sure we didn't get any more questions, and it looks like the questions have come to an end. So this concludes our first Beyond Barriers Conversations on Equity and Information Conference. Thank you everyone for joining us today, especially to all of our speakers, Jillian and Lily, Desiree and Melissa, and then finally Sarah and Sonia. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope everyone's understanding and appreciation for diverse youth literature has expanded, and that your TBR list have grown a little bit longer, because I know mine definitely has. With that, please keep a lookout for future DEIA-centered programming from the School of Information Sciences. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future programming, please send me, and my name is Amber Case. I use they, she pronouns. I'm the Academic Services Officer and DEIA Coordinator for the School of Information Sciences. If you need to reach out to us, please send me an email at acase@wayne.edu. I'm putting it in the chat right now. And thank you, everyone. You are free to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. And goodbye.